John, we're having a series of conversations about adaptive leadership, and I'm delighted to say we're at the second stage of our series of conversations where we're going to talk about skills. In the last conversation, we talked a little bit about organizations,
Mm.
what adaptive leadership is, what adaptive challenges are. And in this one, I want to get to some of the skills you've been thinking about, delivering on, supporting organizations and individuals and teams with. I've recently read some of your work and a paper that you're writing around this theme. And things that stuck out to me were things like, if I want to be an adaptive leader, I've got to spot when I need to change and when my organization needs to change. And I've got to master the response to that change. So I've got to do something about it potentially. And I've got to master how I deal with that change. I've also got to mobilize people and get them on board. So and build a sort of culture of change and testing and learning around this. So those are some things that jumped out to me. I just wondered,
Very
sort
good
of,
summary, Hugh. You've
well,
clearly
thank you. I mean, it's great to get to be having this deep dive into those different things, and also looking back at things that things that you work on. I think in this topic of adaptive leadership, it brings together many aspects of your work and Management Futures work in a really sweet way. Let alone the fact that it's an effective thing to be doing. But can you tell me about this? What are standout skills that you're working on that people have been asking you for around this theme?
um, yeah, so I think first of all, I think this wouldn't be unique to adaptive leadership, but what I notice often happens in a space like this is that people will write about it. They'll recognize the importance of it. So I think this happened with psychological safety, actually. People recognize the importance of it, but the work around how do we respond, what does good look like, and how do we build that capability is a bit lighter. So that's definitely what we've been leaning into over the last few years is, okay, if you want to build that capacity, what are the muscles, for want of a better analogy, that you want to build?
Hmm.
So as you were saying, I think so there's a whole skill set around how you spot a skill set, but also disciplines and approaches around how
Hmm.
do you recognize the need for change, spotting it. Um, we might come back to it, but the writing sort of talks about standing on the balcony, but it's essentially taking time out to helicopter out. And the standing on the balcony analogy is I like is if you were organizing a party, when you're in the party, you can think, hey, this is brilliant, I'm having a great time. And then you suddenly go out and sort of look at the dance floor in front of you, and you notice, well, okay, that's fine. People who super know each other are having a really good time, but there's a load of other people who are looking actually really bored or awkward, etc., around it. So it's that zooming out from the day-to-day operations to have a look at what's going on, what's coming, what are we missing. So that's one key skill. The Depending on the level of urgency around that need for change, I think the second skill, which we would talk about, is getting the thermostat right, the level of urgency
Hmm.
right. So one risk is around we don't have enough urgency. So we squander, we just keep kicking the can down the road. We keep not changing because it's uncomfortable, right? We
Mm.
can come back to that. So, but another risk is we panic, right? So under the pressure, and under real fear, people often look to leaders to have the answers, and then leaders want to be good leaders, so leaders feel pressure to have the answers, and actually that can lead to completely the wrong response because we don't know what works. So
So they're living up to perhaps an older tradition of leadership or authoritarian sort of leadership of here's
authoritative
what to
leadership.
do,
Yep.
rather than bringing people into the circle of
Yep.
ideas and conversation. I was really taken when you was talking about standing on the balcony, that
Yep.
there are people on the edges that you're bringing into that. Tell me about that urgency of response. They tell me about the timescales on which this works, because that really fascinates me. How people are seeing an issue and then addressing it.
So there are, I think we can talk about two types of adaptive challenge. One is where an adaptive challenge that is really pressing, an emergency, and it needs a response right now,
Hmm.
and one that has a longer. Now, the reason that's important to recognize is when you have an emergency, there's often a first step you need to take, which is to buy time, and that's a very different skill set to adaptive change. So, buying time actually, paradoxically, normally does require some authoritative leadership, right? It's to
Hmm.
make some quick decisions. Um, but the analogy I would use is a bit like cardiac surgery, right? It's dramatic. You can make some changes, but that is only a sticking plaster for the problem if you don't then address the underlying causes. So you have to spot how much urgency is there. Do we need to do something to buy time? And if we do, really strong, decisive leadership to buy that time
Hmm.
while setting in motion a whole different process, which is around how are we going about figuring out how to adapt. Um, I love the analogy of getting the temperature in the organization right,
Mm.
because this is if we look at all we understand about performing under pressure, humans actually pressure helps humans perform to a certain degree, and then it starts getting in the way. And it's getting the right level of urgency and pressure so that people are focused, awake, bringing a
Hmm.
lot of discretionary effort, but they're not spinning wheels and panicking and knee-jerk reaction.
John, we should be clear that a lot of the things we're talking about here were revealed and investigated by Ronald Heifetz and colleagues. And a word in his writing struck me, this word disequilibrium. So you've been talking about um, comfort
Yeah,
in an organization, how we can uh, not want to face up to change because it's not comfortable and
yeah,
it will increase levels of discomfort. And
yeah.
yet Heifetz and his colleagues sort of say that an element of disequilibrium, an element of uneasiness in our work is actually good for us.
Yeah, I have a slightly different. I don't think it's about good or bad, but it's
Hmm.
but it's about the need to leap into it is really important, right? So it's about recognizing that our brain is wired to see uncertainty as a threat. So we
Hmm.
so we avoid it, and it's painful, particularly if you're really attached to comfortable and it's been working for a long time where you are. So it's uncomfortable. And because it's uncomfortable, if we can avoid it, we will avoid it. If we can't
Mm.
resist it, we will resist it. It's not about, and this is really important actually, it's not about creating disequilibrium for the sake of it.
Hmm.
Might come back to this, Hugh, but I think from a different source of research, from Jim Collins, I think one of the most profound things to really think about is when they looked at the organizations that had adapted the best over 10 years, they actually changed less, not more,
Hmm.
than the organizations that outperformed. What was critical is what they changed. So it's not about the volume of change, right? So
Hmm.
I would be nervous about just creating disequilibrium for the sake of it.
Yeah, to
Because you
keep
would,
people motivated or in some sort of erroneous idea that just by causing discomfort it's going to work.
yeah, or just
This is a
change
much
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah,
and it's that much more empirical approach that we've been
it is.
talking about around
Yeah.
adaptive
But
leadership.
but where his talking about the disequilibrium or confusion is really important is recognizing it and recognizing um, when you need to step into that disequilibrium and confusion, the organizations that are good at doing that
Hmm.
and kind of just built a habit around being comfortable doing that do really well. So they
Yeah,
don't kick the can down the road. They kind of just learn to go, okay, right, we have to go into this unknowing for a while.
yeah.
And that's where we can get into what does really good experimentation looks like. And Amy Edmondson's done some recent work around
Hmm.
this of sort of what she talks about as intelligent failure is okay, but you can step into that disequilibrium really well by just doing low risk experiments,
Hmm.
right? Quick fire, low risk, low cost experiments is how I would say to do that effectively.
Yeah. And these are the cannonballs and the bullets that we spoke about in the first part of our conversation. I direct
Yeah,
people
yeah, yeah. So
there
so
if they've not heard
firing
about those already.
firing cheap
Yeah,
bullets
yeah.
in that experimentation is how to deal with and that limits that. So if you think about, there's often an assumption that resistance to change comes from the people we are leading. actually, in my experience, often the people who see the need to adapt will not always be the senior leaders.
Mm,
So some of the resistance will come from more senior stakeholders, and their nervousness will be around throwing the baby out with the bathwater,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
So I think limiting the risk around that experimentation is really, really critical.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. And I think that's a great insight that what people are worried about could be the loss of things rather than change itself and the evolution that is required in order to adapt to the current challenge. So, yeah, it's something that really attracted me to these ideas that it's treating people as intelligent, caring individuals who really care about the organization, and it's listening to a wider pool of people. So going back to you stood on your balcony,
yeah.
seeing those people who are excluded, you're bringing them in to resolve problems that they're facing. And I think that really appealed to me. I want to get elephants in
So
though,
can I
John.
just
Oh, sorry,
one
sorry. We'll
last thing
save the
on that.
elephants for
Just yeah, yeah.
they
So
will come
one
back.
last
They'll
thing on that
stampede in a couple of minutes. Yeah.
you raised a really great opportunity to talk about is the figuring out what not to change
Hmm.
is every bit as important as figuring out what to change. Um,
Yeah.
and again, if we were talking about what I'm seeing uh, emerge in organizations around this, it's the organizations that know they're going to go through a period of change, but pay some attention to what do we want to safeguard,
Hmm.
find it much easier to take the organization with them because they're
Yeah.
able to say, here's what's not changing. You know, our purpose, what we stand for, still the same.
Hmm.
These core principles, still the same. How we apply them might be different, but these. So I think, yeah, paying attention to that, what not to change
Hmm.
is it's a bit paradoxical, but that's a really critical part of
Yeah.
adapt.
So all part of being able to mobilize people towards a new goal or a new adaptation is respecting what they've got to say and respecting what you want to keep as an organization,
Yeah,
not
absolutely.
just what you want to change and move
Yeah,
towards.
yeah.
Okay, I can't hold them back any longer, John, because I promised elephants a
Elephant.
couple of minutes ago, right?
Yeah.
And I know you love elephants, and
Do
one of
love
the
elephant.
things one of the things you talk about is spotting elephants, right? So, what is an elephant in this context, John? Why do we need to spot these?
Um, So elephant is it's just an analogy. Strangely, actually, it seems to be fairly international. When I test this with audiences all around the world, people get it. It's this idea of the analogy around uh, an issue in the room that everyone knows about, but no one's talking about because it's uncomfortable. One of the, I think, key qualities that stands out from adaptive organizations is they've created a culture where people are encouraged to talk about elephants, to put, um, so they try and eliminate anything as being sacred and not able to be talked about, and they encourage people to challenge the status quo and not hold back from it. So they have conversations about elephants. And they encourage people when they get an emotional response from that, including from a senior leader, to call that behavior out. Because actually, that's quite natural. If you challenge something that's really important to me, I might give you an emotional response.
Mm,
Because I'm not going to be perfect as a leader. I need a culture where you go, hey, I recognize that. There's a great one of my favorite films around adaptive leadership, and it's remarkably accurate because they had all the transcripts, is Apollo 13. And there's a clip in that where Gene Kranz, who's the flight director, the guys suggested shutting off the oxygen, and uh, which gives them fuel on it. And the flight director, Gene Kranz, comes back and goes, if we do that, we don't land on the moon. And the guy says, Gene, you're asking me how to keep these guys alive for the
mhm,
next 8 minutes, not how to land them on the moon. But he had created a culture where there wasn't that hierarchy in the room, which allowed that person to kind of put the elephant on. We're not
mhm,
going to the moon anymore. The
mhm.
mission has shifted. And it's funny, he had moved to that point quicker than the flight director in that moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's really natural. That might happen differently in a different situation, but whoever's moved to seeing that a need for adaptation quickest, you need a culture that they can call it out and shift that agenda. Does that make sense? That's what we mean by elephants is
It does make sense.
the ability to talk about what needs to be talked about and getting rid of this tendency to avoid really critical conversations.
Hmm. It not only does it make sense, but it also reminds me that, we're back to psychological safety. We're back to other things that we've talked about, we've developed, we've worked on for several years. And this topic of adaptive leadership seems to be collating together lots of different skills that we've worked on um, into one new scene. I don't know if you'd agree with that as a new approach. It seems to be something that is a synthesis of other things that I know you've been doing for many years.
So and I know this is something you and I chatted about beforehand. What you make me think about there, though, is it prompts us to call forward wisdom, right? So
Mm,
if I think about organizations that in the past, actually, maybe not right at the moment, but an organization like the chip maker Intel,
mhm,
has been seen in the research during certain periods as a really good model of an adaptive organization. They did things like in meetings would say, what are we missing? Right now, they were doing that decades before we had the phrase psychological safety.
mhm,
So, even though we've put a phrase on it and it might have become a kind of really popular thing to focus on for a few years, that's been going on for ages. Adaptive
mhm,
leadership, who we were saying earlier on, has been going on for ages. What I think we are saying is it feels particularly relevant right now.
mhm,
Organizations are struggling with these challenges right now. But you're right, it does usefully actually. I think it does some of the skills you leaders may have been focusing on and building over the last 3 or 4 years are going to be super relevant and making that connection. So actually, psych safety is becoming less popular at the moment. There's some controversy around the word being misused and stuff, but I think
mhm.
it's a good reminder, whether you call it psych safety or not, having an environment where people can call out stuff we need to call out,
Yeah.
and this is a key why for that. Because if we don't do that, we're going to miss the opportunity to adapt quick enough.